My sister demands I help her buy a house, after refusing to help when I was homeless. I'm a 33-year-old guy, and I come from a family that's, well, let's just say we've always had our issues. You know those families where everything looks fine on the surface, but there's always this undercurrent of tension? That's us. My older sister, Marky, is 37, and for as long as I can remember, things have always been a little off between us. Our parents were the classic strict and frugal type. The kind who believed in teaching us the value of hard work by making us fend for ourselves as soon as we were old enough. We grew up independent, whether we liked it or not. Marky? She always had things figured out. At least that's what everyone thought. Right out of college, she landed a high-paying job in finance. One of those people who always seemed to have it all together, while I struggled to even get by. I wasn't envious at first. We're different people. She's the kind who would talk about investments at family dinners, while I was just happy if I could afford rent for the next month. Our paths couldn't have been more different, but it wasn't until a few years ago that things really started to go downhill between us. See, about 3 years ago, I hit rock bottom. I lost my job. I was working for this small company that ended up going under, and on top of that, I had just gone through a nasty breakup. I had no backup plan, no savings, and no place to go. I ended up homeless for a few months, bouncing between friends' couches and, yeah, even sleeping in my car some nights. It was humiliating, but I was desperate. I needed help. So I swallowed my pride and reached out to Marky. I thought maybe she'd understand. I wasn't asking for much, just a place to crash until I could get back on my feet or maybe a little financial help to tide me over. But Marky wasn't having it. She straight up refused. She told me she had her own life to worry about and couldn't be responsible for my mistakes. That's how she put it. I remember sitting in my car after that call, staring at my phone in disbelief. My own sister, the woman who was living comfortably in her nice apartment with her steady income, couldn't even spare a couch or a few bucks to help me out. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I had no choice but to move on. It wasn't easy, but after months of hard work and a bit of luck, I managed to turn things around. I got a new job, started saving up, and eventually, I was able to get my own place again. Life's been good lately, or at least as good as it can be after everything I've been through. I'm stable now, financially and emotionally, and I've put all that behind me, or so I thought. Fast forward to now. I hadn't spoken to Marky much since that time. Just the occasional family gathering or awkward text exchange. That was until last week when, out of nowhere, I get a message from her. It was casual at first. Just a "Hey, can we talk about something important?" message. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she wanted to catch up, or maybe she had some news to share. I had no idea what was coming. So we get on the phone, and after a few minutes of small talk, she drops the bomb. She tells me that she and her husband are struggling to save up for a house. Apparently, they've found their dream home, but the down payment is out of reach. She starts going on about how difficult it's been for them and how they've tried everything to make it work, but they're still coming up short. At this point, I'm still listening, wondering where this is going. And then, she finally gets to it. She asks if I'd be willing to help. Not just help though, she wants me to co-sign the loan and chip in $15,000 toward the down payment. $15,000. I honestly thought she was joking at first. I mean, this is the same woman who left me hanging when I was homeless. And now she's asking me for a huge favor like it's no big deal. But no, she was dead serious. I was floored. I didn't even know what to say at that moment. I just sat there trying to process the audacity of the whole thing. Marky didn't seem to get why I was hesitating. She kept talking, making it sound like it was just a simple family favor. Something I should be happy to do because, after all, we're family. I could feel the anger building up inside me, but I kept it cool. I told her I needed time to think about it and ended the call. That night I couldn't stop thinking about how messed up the whole situation was. Here I was, just getting my life back together after everything I went through, and now she wants me to risk my financial stability for her. I thought about the nights I spent in my car, the countless times I asked for help, and how she shut me down every single time. And now, suddenly, she's the one in need, and I'm supposed to forget all that? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But I wasn't just angry at her, I was angry at myself for even considering it. Why should I help someone who couldn't be bothered to help me when I was at my lowest? I haven't given her an answer yet, but I'm leaning toward a hard no. I know it's going to cause drama in the family, especially with how my parents always side with Marky. But at this point, I have to look out for myself. I'm not going back to being the person who sacrifices everything for someone who never cared to do the same for me. Update 1. So after that first call with Marky, I sat there just staring at my phone for a good while. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Marky, the same woman who didn't lift a finger when I was down and out, was now asking me to co-sign a loan and throw in $15,000 to help her and her husband get their dream home. The nerve. Right? Anyway, I didn't respond to her immediately. I needed time to process, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, the next morning I get a text from Marky. Nothing too dramatic, just a casual, "Hey, have you had time to think about it?" She made it sound like she was asking me for advice on which restaurant to pick for dinner, not a life-altering financial favor. I figured I couldn't keep dodging the issue, so I called her back. This time she got right into it. She and her husband had been looking for a house for months, apparently. They finally found the one, but with rising costs, they were short on the down payment. She danced around it at first, just talking about how tough it's been for them, how they've tried to save, but you know how things are. I didn't respond much. I just let her talk, all the while thinking back to those nights I spent crashing in my car, praying I'd get a job interview. Back then, I reached out to her hoping she could help in some way. She didn't. Now she was calling me for a favor, and I still hadn't heard any kind of acknowledgement about what went down years ago. Then she finally laid it out. She asked if I could co-sign their loan and, oh yeah, if I could also contribute $15,000 to help with the down payment. Just like that, no hesitation. Like it was the most normal request in the world. I couldn't hold back anymore. I reminded her of what happened when I was the one who needed help. I told her how she left me high and dry when I was at my lowest. I didn't get emotional or anything. I just stated the facts. And you know what she did? She brushed it off. Said she was in a different place back then and didn't have the resources. But now, she insisted, this situation was different because we're family. That's when the guilt tripping started. She talked about how family sticks together and how she would do the same for me if the roles were reversed. That's when I knew she wasn't going to let this go easily. I told her I'd need more time to think about it, but in my head, I was already leaning towards saying no. I just didn't want to deal with the fallout that I knew was coming. After that call, I needed to vent. I called a couple of close friends and told them the whole situation. Without missing a beat, every single one of them told me not to do it. They said it was crazy for Marky to even ask, given how she treated me before, and that I shouldn't feel guilty about protecting my own financial stability. It felt good to hear them say that, but I knew this wasn't just going to be a matter of me telling Marky no and moving on. Sure enough, later that day, my mom calls me. Now, I hadn't told her anything about Marky's request yet, so I figured this was just a normal check-in. But, of course, Marky had already filled her in. She wasn't outright demanding that I help her, but you could hear it in her voice. She used the classic family helps family line, saying Marky and her husband just needed a little boost, and that it would mean a lot if I could step in. The pressure was subtle, but it was there. I didn't give her an answer either. I just nodded along, said I'd think about it, and ended the call. But after that, the texts started coming in from Marky. They weren't angry or anything, at least not at first. They were more like those passive-aggressive messages that people send when they're trying to manipulate you without sounding too pushy. Stuff like, I just thought you'd understand how much this means to us, and I know you'd do the same if you were in my shoes. It was like she was trying to guilt me into saying yes, reminding me over and over again that we were family. As the days went on, I started having flashbacks to when I was homeless. I remembered how desperate I felt, how I just needed a little help, and how alone I was when my own sister wouldn't even give me a place to sleep for a night. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had worked so hard to rebuild my life, and now she was asking me to risk it all for her. I started doing some research on what it really meant to co-sign a loan. Let's just say it's not something you do lightly. If she defaulted, I'd be on the hook for everything. And from what I remembered, Marky wasn't exactly the most responsible person with money. It was a huge risk and one I wasn't sure I was willing to take. A few days later, Marky called again. This time she was more direct. She asked if I'd made a decision and even threw in how upset her husband was that I hadn't jumped at the chance to help. It was like she was trying to make me feel like the bad guy for not immediately offering to bail them out. I didn't give her a final answer right then, but I was getting close. I knew saying no would lead to drama. My family isn't the type to let things go quietly, but I was starting to care less about that. I had to think about my future, and co-signing a loan for someone who didn't help me when I was homeless didn't feel right, no matter how much they tried to guilt trip me. As of now, I'm leaning heavily towards saying no. I just have to figure out how to deal with the inevitable fallout when I do. Update 2. So after a few days of going back and forth with Marky and dealing with the pressure from my mom, I finally made my decision. I told Marky I couldn't help her. I wasn't going to co-sign the loan and I wasn't giving her $15,000. There was no point in dragging it out any longer. I explained that I couldn't risk my own financial future for someone who had left me to fend for myself when I was homeless. It was blunt, but it needed to be said. Marky's reaction was exactly what I expected, explosive. She didn't take it well at all. In fact, she flipped out. She accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and even threw in some guilt trips about how I owed her for all the time she put up with me growing up. It was wild. She acted like I was the one who'd wronged her, completely ignoring the fact that when I needed help the most, she was nowhere to be found. But of course, it didn't stop there. Marky couldn't just be angry on her own. She had to bring our parents into it. My mom called me not long after, clearly upset. She asked me why I wouldn't help my sister, especially now that I'm doing better. She threw out the usual family helps family line, making it sound like I was being heartless for not stepping in. I told her exactly why. I reminded her how Marky refused to help me when I was homeless, how she said she couldn't be responsible for my mistakes, and how I had to claw my way out of that hole on my own. She didn't want to hear it. To her, that was ancient history. She actually said that. She said I needed to get over it and help Marky because apparently she's always been the golden child and deserves some help after all she's done for the family. I couldn't believe it. It was like the years of struggle I went through didn't even matter. I knew then that my mom was fully on Marky's side in this and nothing I said was going to change her mind. But not everyone in my family was against me. Later that day, my dad gave me a call. Now my dad is usually the quiet, neutral type in these kinds of situations, so I didn't expect much. But he surprised me. He told me he understood where I was coming from and that he was proud of me for standing up for myself. He even admitted that Marky has always been entitled and that this was just another example of her expecting everyone to bail her out. It was honestly a huge relief to hear that at least one person in my family saw things from my perspective. However, things escalated even further. A few days after that, I woke up to my phone blowing up with notifications. Apparently, Marky had gone on Facebook and posted this long rant about how I was abandoning the family, how I was greedy and selfish, and how I was destroying her and her husband's dream of owning a home. She painted me as the villain, and of course, friends and distant family members started chiming in, offering their 2 cents on the situation. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had all sorts of opinions about my decision. It was ridiculous. I didn't respond to the post. I wasn't about to get into a public argument on Facebook, especially when Marky was clearly trying to make me look bad, but it hurt. It hurt that she would drag our private issues into the public eye like that, and it hurt even more that so many people were siding with her without even knowing the full story. And then out of nowhere, I got a message from Marky's husband. He accused me of ruining their chances of buying their dream home, said I was being petty, and that I had always been jealous of Marky's success. It was a low blow, especially since I had never once been jealous of Marky. Sure, our lives had gone in different directions, but I was content with where I was now. His message just felt like another attempt to guilt me into doing something I knew I shouldn't. Things only got worse from there. Some of our extended family started treating me differently, clearly believing Marky's version of events. They didn't say anything to my face, but the cold shoulders and awkward silences were hard to miss. It felt like I was being ostracized for simply protecting my own financial future. Thankfully, my friends were still in my corner. They reminded me that I had done the right thing, that I wasn't responsible for fixing Marky's financial mess, and that I needed to focus on my own well-being. Their support helped me stay grounded, but I'd be lying if I said the whole situation didn't make me second-guess myself. To clear my head, I decided to meet with a financial advisor. I wanted to make absolutely sure that I was making the right decision. The advisor was great. He went over everything with me and reaffirmed that co-signing a loan for someone in Marky's position would be a massive risk. He warned me about the potential fallout if Marky defaulted, and I knew right then that I couldn't afford to take that chance. Despite knowing I made the right choice, I still found myself reflecting on our family dynamic. Growing up, it always felt like I was expected to clean up after Marky, like I was the one who had to make sacrifices while she got a free pass. This situation just felt like the latest in a long line of similar events. But for the first time, I was standing my ground. For the first time in weeks, my phone was quiet. No calls from Marky. No guilt-tripping texts from my mom. It was almost eerie, like the calm before the storm. But in that quiet, I found a strange sense of peace. I realized that for the first time in years, I was putting myself first. And even if it meant losing some family relationships, I knew it was the right thing to do. Update 3, after the whole Facebook rant and the messages from Marky's husband, things went quiet. I didn't hear from Marky or her husband for several days, and honestly, it was a relief. The tension was still there lingering, but the silence gave me space to breathe. No more guilt trips, no more passive-aggressive texts. It felt strange, like the calm before a storm, but I was enjoying it while it lasted. Then out of nowhere, my parents called. There was this family reunion that had been planned for a while, one of those big events where everyone gets together, including extended family I haven't seen in years. I wasn't exactly excited about going, especially knowing Marky would be there, but my parents insisted. They thought it would be the perfect time to clear the air. I wasn't so sure about that. But after some pressure from my mom and a few "it'll be good for the family" comments, I gave in. I figured I could go, keep a low profile, and avoid any major drama. Easier said than done. The day of the reunion came, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension. The room was full of familiar faces, cousins, aunts, uncles, but all I could think about was Marky. Sure enough, it didn't take long for her to find me. She walked straight up to me, not caring who was around, and immediately started in on me. In front of everyone, Marky loudly accused me of turning my back on family. She demanded to know why I wouldn't help her when she needed it. She was playing the victim, making it seem like I was the bad guy for not co-signing her loan and giving her money. She kept saying things like, "We're family, we're supposed to stick together," and made it sound like I was heartless for saying no. At first, I just stood there letting her rant, but then something inside me snapped. I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let her humiliate me in front of everyone. So I calmly told my side of the story. I explained right there in front of everyone how Marky refused to help me when I was homeless. I reminded her, and the whole room, that when I was at my lowest point, she didn't care. She had her comfortable life and left me to fend for myself. And now, years later, she was expecting me to risk my financial stability for her. It was unbelievable. The room went silent for a moment. I could feel the tension in the air as people started to process what I had said. And then, just like that, the family split into two camps. Some people backed me up, saying that I was right to stand my ground and that family shouldn't take advantage of each other. Others, mostly the older relatives, started saying things like, family should forgive and forget, and that I needed to let go of the past. Marky couldn't handle it. She stormed out of the reunion, making a huge scene as she left. She yelled something about how I was ruining the family and how I was selfish for not helping her. Her husband followed her out, shooting me a nasty glare as they walked out the door. Once they were gone, a few cousins and aunts came up to me, quietly thanking me for standing up to Marky. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had issues with her. They told me stories about how she had been manipulative and entitled for years, always expecting things to go her way. It was eye-opening to hear that I wasn't alone in this. But of course, the drama wasn't over. Later that night, my phone blew up with messages in the family group chat. Marky was still ranting, sending long paragraphs about how I was abandoning the family and how I was the reason she and her husband couldn't buy their dream home. My mom chimed in too, sending passive-aggressive messages about how I needed to make things right and apologize. I held my ground though. I wasn't about to back down, no matter how much pressure they put on me. I repeated what I had said earlier, that it wasn't fair for Marky to expect my help now when she didn't care about my struggles back then. But I'll admit, it wasn't easy. The constant messages, the family drama, it was all starting to wear me down. At the reunion, my dad pulled me aside and dropped another bombshell. He told me that Marky and her husband were in far worse financial shape than they were letting on. They weren't just short on the down payment for the house, they were drowning in debt. The house was a last-ditch effort to stabilize their finances, but it was a risky move. Hearing that made me feel conflicted again. Part of me felt bad, knowing how bad things were for Marky. But then I remembered my own struggle, the months I spent homeless, and how Marky didn't lift a finger to help. It was hard to shake that memory, no matter how much guilt I felt. Thankfully, my friends continued to support me. They reminded me that Marky's financial mess was of her own making, and that helping her now would only enable her poor decisions. They stressed that it wasn't my responsibility to fix her mistakes, and deep down I knew they were right. But the emotional toll of it all was starting to hit me. The constant guilt-tripping, the family drama, it was exhausting. I felt drained mentally and emotionally, so I decided to start seeing a therapist. I needed help processing all the guilt and manipulation I was dealing with from my family. The therapist was great. She reinforced that I had every right to protect my own financial future, especially given Marky's past actions. Just when I thought things were starting to settle down, Marky texted me again. This time she didn't ask for money. She asked if I could at least talk to the bank and vouch for her. She insisted this was her last chance to get the house, and she was desperate. It felt like a never-ending cycle, and I knew that whatever decision I made next would come with even more fallout. Update 4. After Marky's last desperate text asking me to vouch for her at the bank, I knew I had to be clear and firm once and for all. I couldn't drag this out any longer and I definitely wasn't going to get sucked into another guilt trip. So I sent her a short, direct response. I told her flat out that I wasn't going to vouch for her, lend her money, or co-sign anything. I made it clear that this conversation was over and I wouldn't be changing my mind. It didn't take long for Marky to respond. This time she didn't try to manipulate me with guilt or subtle hints. No, she went straight for the jugular. She sent me an ultimatum: if you don't help me, you're no longer my sister. Don't ever ask for anything from me again. I was shocked. I stared at the message for a while, not sure what to even make of it. The word stung, but there was also a strange sense of finality. It was like, in that moment, I realized this had never been about family for Marky. It was about control, about her getting her way, no matter the cost. It hurt, but it also gave me the clarity I needed. Later that day, my mom called, clearly distraught. She was in tears, devastated by the feud between Marky and me. She begged me to reconsider, saying that Marky was just under a lot of stress and didn't mean what she was saying. She went on about how this whole thing was tearing the family apart and how it was my responsibility to make peace. But then she dropped something I wasn't expecting. She revealed that Marky had been threatening to cut my parents off if I didn't help. She was using her position as the so-called golden child to manipulate them into pressuring me even more. She told them that if I didn't step up, she wouldn't speak to them again or help them financially in the future. This was a new low, even for Marky, and it was the breaking point for me. For the first time, I set firm boundaries with my mom. I told her that I wasn't responsible for fixing Marky's messes. If she chose to cut ties with our parents, that was on her, not me. I wasn't going to be manipulated or guilt-tripped into giving in, no matter what she threatened. It was hard for her to hear, and I could tell she was struggling with it, but I stood my ground. I emphasized that they had allowed Marky to get away with this kind of behavior for too long and enabling her now would only make things worse. She didn't like it, but I think deep down she knew I was right. Not long after that conversation, Marky took things to another level. She posted yet another rant on Facebook, this time accusing me of being the reason our parents were struggling emotionally. She called me a traitor to the family and said that I was the source of all their stress and heartbreak. It was brutal, and it escalated the family feud even more. This time though, I didn't respond. I didn't engage. Instead, I blocked Marky on all social media platforms. I was done. Done with the drama, done with the manipulation, and done with letting her control the narrative. Blocking her was the only way I could take back control of my life, and it was a long time coming. After I cut her off, something unexpected happened. Several family members, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in a while, reached out privately to express their support. They told me they understood why I was standing my ground, and some even shared their own stories of dealing with Marky's manipulative behavior. It turns out I wasn't the only one who had been dealing with her entitlement over the years. Others had just been too afraid to speak up. Hearing that gave me a sense of relief. For so long, It felt like I was the only one standing up to her, but now I knew I wasn't alone. Despite the ongoing tension in the family, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace after blocking Marky. I had finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let her manipulations dominate my decisions anymore. Of course, the fallout continued. I heard through the grapevine that Marky and her husband were struggling even more. They still hadn't secured the house and their financial situation had gotten worse. Word spread that Marky was burning bridges with other family members too, not just me. It seemed like she was spiraling, but I knew I couldn't let that drag me down anymore. The family itself had become divided. Some relatives sided with me, understanding why I couldn't help Marky, while others took her side, believing her version of events. Holiday gatherings became awkward, with certain family members avoiding each other and the tension hanging thick in the air. But at least I had some peace knowing I had made the right decision. I started focusing on rebuilding my relationships with the family members who supported me. I spent more time with my dad and with cousins who understood my perspective. Slowly, I began to feel like I was regaining control of my life, piece by piece. Throughout this whole ordeal, my therapist had been a huge help. She helped me see that sometimes cutting toxic family members out of your life is necessary for self-preservation. It wasn't easy and it came with a lot of emotional baggage, but I knew that protecting myself was the right thing to do. Even though the family feud was far from over and there were still a lot of unresolved issues, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I had made my decision, set my boundaries, and for the first time in a long time, I was putting myself first. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore, it was about reclaiming my life. And I wasn't going to let Marky take that from me. Update 5. It's been several months since I last spoke to Marky. The silence that followed cutting her out of my life has been different. On the one hand, it's been peaceful. I no longer wake up to messages filled with guilt trips, passive-aggressive comments, or demands for help. On the other hand, it's been a little challenging. It's strange to realize that a huge chunk of the family drama I was used to dealing with is suddenly gone. For the first time in a long time, I can focus on myself without the constant conflict hanging over my head. Family dynamics have definitely shifted in the aftermath. I've become closer to certain relatives, people who understand why I made the choices I did. My dad, for one, has been more supportive than ever. We talk more now and our relationship has grown stronger. He even told me he's proud of the way I've handled everything, which coming from him means a lot. My mom, on the other hand, is still conflicted. She's always had a soft spot for Marky, and I get it. She's been trying to convince me to reconcile with her, saying that family is family and that we shouldn't let things like this tear us apart. But I've stayed firm in my decision. I've explained to her again and again that this isn't about holding a grudge, it's about protecting my own well-being. I think she's starting to understand that even though it's hard for her to fully accept. As for Marky, well, things haven't been going well for her. Word has it that she and her husband were unable to secure the house they were so desperate for. Rumors have been floating around that they had to move into a much smaller rental and their financial troubles are only getting worse. Despite all of that, Marky has continued to blame me for her problems. She's been telling anyone who will listen that I'm the reason they couldn't buy their dream home, painting herself as the victim in this whole mess. It's frustrating, but at the same time, it's not surprising. What has surprised me is how much I've grown from this experience. For the first time, I've learned to prioritize my own well-being without feeling guilty about it. Setting boundaries with family is never easy, but I've realized that it's necessary. I've spent too much of my life bending over backward for people who wouldn't do the same for me. This situation with Marky was the breaking point, and it's made me stronger in ways I didn't expect. Now that I'm in a more stable place financially, I've started thinking about new opportunities. I've even started saving for a home of my own, which feels surreal considering how things were a few years ago when I was homeless. Back then, buying a house seemed impossible, but now it's something I can realistically aim for. It's a huge step forward, and I'm excited about what the future holds. My therapist has been a big part of helping me through all of this. She's been guiding me as I navigate the family guilt and the emotional manipulation that's been weighing me down for years. Through therapy, I've started to see my value beyond what my family expects of me. I'm learning that it's okay to set boundaries, even if it means upsetting people. In the end, I have to take care of myself first. Then, out of the blue, something unexpected happened. I received a message from Marky's husband. He apologized for everything, for his behavior, for Marky's behavior, and for how they both treated me during the whole ordeal. He admitted that their financial situation was far worse than I ever knew and that they had been desperate for anyone to help. He said he understood now why I couldn't step in and that he was sorry for how things had turned out. I'll be honest, it caught me off guard. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of compassion for him. I could understand the pressure of being in a bad financial situation, and I didn't doubt that he had been trying to make things work any way he could. But as much as I sympathized with him, I knew that getting involved again would only bring more drama. So I chose not to engage. I appreciated the apology, but I had moved on, and I wasn't about to go back down that road. Throughout all of this, my friendships have become stronger than ever. My friends supported me through every step of this ordeal, and I've come to value those relationships even more now. They've been my anchor through the storm, and I know I'm lucky to have such a solid group of people in my life. As for my future plans, I've started thinking about more than just buying a house. I've been looking into traveling, seeing more of the world, and continuing to build the life I've fought so hard to create. It's strange to think about how far I've come from those days of couch surfing and scrambling to make ends meet. But I'm here now, and I'm determined to make the most of it. Things with my family are still a bit up in the air. My mom is slowly starting to respect the boundaries I've set, and my dad has been more supportive than ever. We've been spending more time together, and I think he's starting to see that this whole situation has only made me stronger. Then, in a final twist, I got one last message from Marky. She asked for forgiveness and for a chance to make things right. She claimed she had learned from her mistakes and wanted to patch things up. I read the message a few times before deciding not to respond. After everything that's happened, I don't think anything she says will change the core of who she is. I've moved on, and I'm not looking back. For now, I'm focused on my future, and I'm finally at peace.